Hi, I'm David Safin, Associate Professor of Digital Art and Media at Saint Vincent College. This is my office, and these are my office hours. The purpose of my show is to introduce you to creative talent and to show you some of their work. Now, I'm doing something a little differently today. My guest did not actually make the video, but he is connected to its subject, Roman Verostko. So I want to welcome Andy Julo, the curator for the Verostko Center of Fine Arts here at Saint Vincent. So welcome, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
So just to let people know who you are before we get to the film we're going to watch, can you tell me how you found your way here to Saint Vincent and how you became a curator, or what even is a curator?
Sure, yeah. So a curator is someone who takes care of objects of any kind in a collection. The word comes from the Latin word curare, which means to care for. So for centuries, there have been people who have collected the objects, labeled the objects, organized the objects, wrote about the objects, or in instances like this, talked about the objects. So my job is to keep track of the objects that St. Vincent has amassed over the past 176 or so years that it's been around, to keep them here at the Verostko Center and to display them and interpret them for our community, but also the public at large.
So what is our relationship to Roman Verostko? Who is he, and why is he the namesake for our gallery?
That's a great question. Most households wouldn't know Roman's name, but Roman is and was very proud to be from this part of the country. Roman was a monk here for 18 years and left the monastery. But Roman is most remembered for being one of the first people to use computers to make works of art. He was born just weeks before the beginning of the Great Depression in Tars, Pennsylvania, so the Mount Pleasant area outside of Pittsburgh. Grew up in poverty. His family were all in the coke coal fields of outside of the city. He studies at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, but on his 21st birthday, joins the monastery in 1950. Roman was very talented. He studied in New York. He studied abstract painting and worked alongside many of the artists that are collected by major American museums. But in the late 60s, has a bit of a crisis of faith and meets a woman who was at the time the chair of the Department of Psychology at Duquesne University. The two leave the area, and he becomes the dean of the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, in addition to teaching humanities courses, liberal arts courses at an art college in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Roman has access to computers in the 1970s, and this is at a time where computers occupy a room. They're massive machines, right? You need punch cards to operate them. But Roman was approaching this work as an artist, and he began trying to use code, computer code, to make art, right? There was a lot of skepticism about this for decades, right? Many art historians sort of hated this group. There were not that many of them who either had access to the machines or who were seen as these were objects that were associated with the military or the military industrial complex. But for Roman, they represented a world of ideas that were sort of absolutely vast. So he continues to write computer code, and he would attach his, once he obtains a personal computer, to a pen plotter, so a device that uses multiple pens to create drawings, typically for schematics in the fields of engineering or architecture. But his would be like his paintings, they would be abstractions. Roman does this for decades. After he retires from Minneapolis College of Art and Design, he really kicks it into high gear and continues to make and to share his work until the end of his life. Roman recently passed away just a few weeks ago on June 1st, 2024, at his home in Minneapolis at the age of 94. Someone who had lived a very full life and had made a lot of work during that time.
So you obviously had a relationship with him. I mean, it wasn't just his art. So from the time you met him throughout your time working here, can you explain that relationship?
Sure. Roman was pretty exacting in the way he talked about his work and the way he created it. I knew by working with him, I needed to be able to engage his ideas and in a way that was both respectful, but it's also a way of positioning him within the story of art. Again, there were a good 12 to 15 folks who were working with this, what's essentially known as early computer coding at the time that Roman was, slightly before, and then folks afterwards. So having awareness of what he was doing, while also trying to address what he was picking up in his work. Roman could be challenging in some moments because he was very insistent as somebody who had studied art history and taught art history at the collegiate level. He was someone who wrote extensively about art and algorithms, but also someone who had written pretty extensively about abstraction and things as far as liturgical art that's abstract while he's still a priest. Reading a lot of what Roman wrote and trying to get down to what I felt were his essential questions. Roman's life is marked by these questions he entertains that I like to imagine when he first begins here at Saint Vincent. Some questions that could be traced back to childhood. These were things like, what does it mean to be in service to a group of people? What does it mean to translate information and use a machine to help you do that? What is a creative act? What is a unique mark, right? So some of them are the questions of modernism, and some of them are more concerned with Roman's sense of spirituality.
Yeah, so when we think about art, it's this idea of process versus product, that what is on the wall, what is on the screen, what am I hearing? But I think, as we'll see here in the film shortly, a lot of what he did was innovative in its process. And his process was so new and innovative that, in a way, what you saw on the wall in the frame didn't do it justice. You needed to actually know how it was made. And that seems to have gotten connected to the art itself. Again, so often it is, what is on the screen? But in this case, it really does help the audience to know not only how it was made, but how unique that process was at the time he was making it. So is that something that you feel is necessary to communicate to people when you are introducing them to his work?
Absolutely. We hear from a lot of folks who may not have a background in art or may not know a lot about 20th century abstraction. They're not exactly sure what they're looking at. And that's okay. The members of his group, which are known as the Algorists, Roman is the co-founder of what's called the Algorist group. Their manifesto, like any 20th century art movement, is a written down statement that the members of the group would have accepted or ratified, is written as an algorithm. In order to understand the group, one does have to know a little bit about computing, or a little bit about abstraction, or a little bit about color. And yet, Roman's work stands out from his peers in that rather than making simple line work, he would layer the colors on top of each other, was very interested in color relationships and simply creating these images that invited you to get lost in them. Roman got lost in making them in some ways, in that each pen stroke that you'll see is essentially the same stroke repeated over and over again in a multitude of directions. In some instances, Roman has turned control over to the computer in order to make some certain choices in a particular drawing. However, he would say, and this is one of the perspectives of a modern artist, is that they would say that they're in control of the process. They're in control of whether you see the work or not. They're in control of whether they believe it's finished. So what you're looking at is someone who is very interested in output, a physical output. There are a few projects that we have that lived completely in a digital space or through a screen, what we would call 4D art or time-based media. But most of it, and that of his contemporaries, is physical output. They're interested in a thing that you can hold in your hands. They're interested in the analog. They wanted to make drawings or paintings. So these are things that could be seen as part of this long arc of modern art. And even more broadly, the sort of wider impulse surrounding painting. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, yes, it definitely does. And it's funny now, we've reached a point where I'm reminded of things that happen to me in class when I'm talking about processes as it relates to film and video production, where I have to give over to a piece of work and say, it's probably better for you to see this in action than to hear me talk about it. And you were very articulate in your descriptions of these, but I think it is really helpful for people to see this in action. So I think this is a really good time for us to jump into this film that was produced to play at the gallery. And it really is an introduction to Roman. You're going to hear from Roman in this. You're also going to see his work created. So why don't we just take a look at it right now?
Now, a local artist has created a computer program that lets a machine create art. As entertainment reporter Bill Carlson tells us, this computer actually asks for the brush, and the results are fascinating.
It's an unusual medium for even the most innovative of artists, but then there's seldom been anything ordinary about Roman Verostko's life. A respected artist and art historian, Roman, as he is called by his friends, has taught those subjects around the world and is now on the faculty of the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Teaching in China had a great influence on the direction of his art, and one must assume that his earlier 18 years spent as a Benedictine monk left its mark on the philosophy of his work.
We have experiences within ourselves, sensible experiences that can pull us or push us one way. And we have a rational mind and logic, and it can pull us another way. And I became very interested in what I called the resolution of opposites, how we resolve all of this and bring it to a kind of peace. You could imagine a person like myself being born in the coal fields of Pennsylvania. There was a whole world out there that I didn't know much about. I was 21 years old on the day I came here. And I realized that this was a place where I could learn, I could gain an enriched spiritual life, and have a future. And so that's really what drew me to Saint Vincent. From the very beginning at Saint Vincent, I became immersed in my art as well as my academic studies. Those seminary years in theology and philosophy really drew me deeply into the life and studying the history of spirituality and the history of, actually the history of art as well. I was very interested in placing this kind of teaching in the context of changing technologies. I wanted it to be something very modern, very avant-garde. This was post-World War II, and we had a time of resurgence in industry and the arts, and we wanted that celebrated in this mural. I had learned abstract expressionism. I had learned how to work with expressive brushwork. It was somehow placing the rational and the irrational in the same field. In January of 1963, a tragic fire occurred here and burned a great deal of the monastery, threatened the basilica, and many of the important areas of the monastery were destroyed completely. And the years from 1962 through to about 65, 66, they were just struggling to get back to some kind of normalcy and build a new monastery. In consultation with the archabbot and some of the advisors of the monastery, came up with the idea of me creating these texts and words to embed the stroke, written word, in an expressive way in concrete. Words that would be spoken between the monks from one to the other. Throughout this building, as you walk through, every often turn a corner and surprisingly see something to remind you of some aspect of your life or how one wants to be in the brotherhood of a monastery.
And for me, if we want to talk about meaning, I don't think that we want to talk about meaning in the sense that we're able to define the world so much as to awaken to it, to discover it, to experience a new dimension of the world, perhaps something we hadn't seen before.
I had gone to Minneapolis, and in Minneapolis, I took up a position with the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I came to a period of creating works that were in a space that didn't have gravity. I would think of it in terms of cosmic space that's in my imagination. My wife was a psychologist who was very interested in what happened in the imagination of the children with whom she worked on occasion. But she was also interested in the imagination in the adult world. This playfulness is not only for children, but it's also for adults, for the child in us, that we awaken it, that we allow our imagination to be playful, to reach out. It's not so much explaining as it is discovering. It's not so much as answering as it is finding something new. Minneapolis was one of the places in the world where the most advanced computational industries were, that's where they were located. When I first began to learn about code, that is software, how it worked and how computers worked, I came to realize, even when I was writing my very first, earliest basic programs, I came to realize that, yes, one of the things you're confronted with all the time is the decision bit. What is going to make me say yes or no at a certain point?
To create a drawing, Roman has adapted his plotter, which can hold 14 pens or other markers to create a drawing. He has even adapted it to hold brushes, with which he draws an Oriental-like calligraphy influenced by his visits to China.
When I taught in China, when I went there in 1985 to teach, China was just recovering from the Cultural Revolution that had destroyed a lot of their ancient monuments. Mao Zedong, he tried to erase that culture, but it was people like Wang Dongling, who followed my course in China, who taught me a lot about brushwork. So there's a way in which every pen and ink stroke does have a bit of variation, but they're all the same stroke. I feel like this says a lot about China and about Slovakia and about Saint Vincent and about the world we're in. A computer is something, you could say that if I pick up this phone of mine, this is a universal computer. That is to say that the circuit logic what makes it work, ultimately, is the very same thing that was identified by Alan Turing in his universal Turing machine. There is a code here, written in ones and zeros, that is actually a universal Turing machine. That logic here is about what is computable. It's meant to be like the medieval scriptures that had Holy Scripture and drawings to illustrate and celebrate the Scripture. So this illustration celebrates the Scripture of a universal Turing machine, or the logic and the procedures underlying computing and computability. And it's always this dialectic, you might say, between chance and control that life proceeds. There was a 14th century monk who wrote and identified what he called the Cloud of Unknowing, so I picked that up. And that is part of the wisdom of all spiritual writers, come to the point where they recognize that they are knowing, they're not knowing. And in the end, I understood very well that these machines were so powerful. I could get expressive brush strokes. I could get all kinds of new forms I never dreamed before. And yet, this powerful computer, with all its power and all its progress, it was left like the rest of us. It couldn't answer the unanswerable. Complementarity is how we come through that experience to be confronted with the real deep realities of life experience. And that's what I think most of my exhibition is about. I can't give you an answer. I can ask a question. I can lead you to see something more, to recognize there's something more. But I don't necessarily explain it. Pay attention. Pay attention to the world that we're in, and see what you can do to help make it better. If you have your eyes set and see something that's worth paying attention to, that's what artists do. That's what you got to do.
All right, welcome back. It is a really fascinating look at his work, but it's also nice to get to meet a person, a creator, especially like you mentioned, having passed recently. So it's really good that we have this document, this artifact that can always keep him alive. So, Andy, can you just give me a little bit of information about how that video was produced?
Sure. I worked with James Ferris at Massive Media, so a Pittsburgh-based film company. Was awesome to work with. James was very receptive to the ideas about breaking it into segments that were projects that were really particular to Roman, or ones that were represented here on campus that we wanted to feature. You'll remember we're looking inside of the monastery. So that's an area that's off limits to the public. So being able to see behind the scenes a little bit, look at work that is literally embedded in the walls. And in a certain instance, with the largest of the pieces that we see, is load bearing. So it's artwork that also has a kind of quite literal functional purpose. I would provide James with a number of photographs. You saw historical footage that were from previous interviews of when Roman is interviewed on Canadian Toronto television, of other gallerists interviewing him or documenting the process of how the plotter is creating the drawing. So it was a lot of fun. We got to spend time with Roman, and he could be a kind of a ham on camera. So it was a lot of fun to go to different sites on campus. and get for him to talk. We're always looking for artists to hear from artists in their own words, what they think of a project, both if we can immediately after they create it, and then oftentimes with some time lapse in there. They often think about the project in a new way, or they might recall a memory that they hadn't necessarily shared at the time that either we were gifted it or it was installed.
And I'm glad you brought that up about the glimpses it gave to different sides of campus. People should know that, part of your job is also to curate art around our campus. And there are a lot of pieces of Roman's work that were lined up the halls outside my office. You can find some in the Fred Rogers Center near the Rogers Institute. So his work extends beyond the confines of the gallery. But I also want people to know that the gallery's offerings aren't limited to Roman's work. So can you give us an understanding of what types of exhibitions that you put on beyond just Roman's work?
Sure. Like you said, anybody who visits the Verostko Center will see examples of Roman's work from different periods. But we also have work from our permanent collection always on view. Most of our collection are 17th to 20th century European and American art. And we have a large collection of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings that are also currently on display, along with items that relate to the history of Saint Vincent dating back to its beginnings in the mid-19th century. So things related to Germans, specifically the Bavarians that came here and created works of art, both for campus and in the wider mid-Atlantic. Things are always rotating. So in our main exhibition space inside the Verostko Center, we rotate shows of local regional artists as well as international artists. So in the spring, we'll show student work as well as professional artists associated with the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh. That was a show we had in the spring. So the idea and one of Roman's real concerns with having his name on the building was that things would always rotate. So there's a real range by which people can see. And all of this is intentionally it's both for our academic community and to support coursework, but it's also a way of making available these collections to the people here locally in Latrobe, more widely in Westmoreland County and Southwest Pennsylvania.
And I want to give you multiple chances to inform our audience about how they can learn more about the center. So can you tell them how they can find it perhaps online?
Sure. So we're at verostcocenter.org is our website. So that's VEROSTKO, verostcocenter.org. You can find us on Instagram, Verostko_center. Both of those have news updates. You can look at examples of some of the highlights from our collection and receive updates on what's coming up next.
All right. So as we wrap things up here, I'm really glad that we were able to do this. I'm really glad that we're able to spread the word about the good work that Roman did and the good work that you are doing here at the center. So with that, we're going to call it a day. Thank you for joining me there, Andy.
Thank you.
And, I look forward to seeing you all again, but it's time for me to get back to work. So I'll see you next time.